Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Nicomachean Ethics and Aristotle's idea of happiness. One of the things that might be a little bit difficult in helping us understand the whole Nicomachean Ethics, the relationship of happiness to flourishing and all that kind of stuff, virtue, is the fact that the word in Greek that is translated by the text as happiness is this word, eudaimonia. That's the original Greek. Now, translation is always a choice, right? And there isn't any one exact translation. And so most English translations will call eudaimonia happiness, which is fine. However, this word happiness has kind of taken on a different meaning, I think, in the modern world. And so a better translation of what the Greeks meant by the word eudaimonia would be flourishing. This is the word we want to try to use when we think about the word happiness as it's written in the text. And just as an example, take something like the word decadence, or something that is decadent. The word decadent, if you think about it, might conjure up in your mind ideas of richness, of even chocolate, right? Because this word is often used in terms of advertising for things like chocolate pudding and candy bars and that kind of stuff. But this is not at all what it means. The word decadent means to commit a mortal sin that damns your soul to hell. And that's sort of what a decadent lifestyle is. A decadent, you could say decadent like that, would be a person who commits the types of sins that lead to hell. My point in that is that over time words take on different meanings, and so when current Americans say decadent, it means something absolutely different than, say, it would have meant to an American, some time ago. But let's return to flourishing, and perhaps a little example of what he means will help us. So here, I'm trying to make a flower. Envision, if you will, a flower. There he is. Life is good for this guy. But he's got some little buddies here. Here's another little guy. And then here's another guy who's, not doing so well. Now, envision these flowers. Let's say they are flower A, flower B, and flower C. Now obviously we would say that this guy is the flower who is flourishing, right? Because flourishing means to thrive and that kind of stuff. And literally, fleur, in French, flourishing, literally this flower is flowering. And we would say it's flourishing because it is the ultimate example of a flower. So it is the ultimate example of flower. So in other words, this guy here is being flower better than those other guys. So this guy literally is flowering. Okay, now why flourishing? Keep in mind that we have translated flourishing to be eudaimonia, so another translation would be happiness. So we could always also think in terms of happiness. So this, flower B, is our happy flower. Now these other guys, not so much. These other two guys, A and C, are not flourishing. Assume that all things are equal. Assume they have, they've been alive the same amount of time, they have the same sun and water. If you assume that all things are equal, well, what's up with A and C? The problem with these guys is they are not reaching their potential. And what is their potential? Well, their potential is to become the maximum example of flower. So these guys are not reaching the potential as flower. So in other words, these two guys are lesser flowers. That's kind of how it goes. Now, we could say, okay, well, it might sound mean to say that those guys are somehow lesser flowers, but they're not fulfilling the function of flower. And let's see. Suppose we were to say to ourselves, okay, well, what is it that makes a flower good? Okay, because we would say that this guy here is a good flower, right? And we would say that these guys here are not good flowers or bad flowers, because indeed you wouldn't give a bouquet of these guys to your girlfriend or whatever, or, you know, send them for someone's wedding, whatever, because they are not good. So the question then becomes, well, what makes it good? So we have to ask ourselves, first of all, what the point of a flower is. Like, what does a flower do? And so we could say, well, a flower grows straight toward the sun. So it grows straight and tall. I'm just going to put straight for simplicity. And it blooms. And indeed, if you think about it, you say, well, okay, well, that would be the nature of flower. That's what they do. They grow toward the sun and they bloom. Okay. So in other words, what we could say is that these are the traits of a good flower. In other words, these are the virtues of a good flower. So when we see a flower that grows straight and blooms, right, then we know that it is a virtuous or a good flower. And then if we look at these guys, we say, well, the good one possesses the virtue of good flower, and the bad ones do not have the virtue of good flower. So then the next question becomes, well, what are virtues? Virtues translate as excellences. So an excellent feature of a flower is when it blooms and grows straight. So we would ask ourselves, do these guys have any excellences? And the answer is no, because they're not blooming well and they're not growing straight. And so they do not have the virtue. So a virtue is a trait that allows the flower to excel at being flower. So since these guys do not excel at being flower, we would not call them virtuous. And since they are not virtuous and excelling at flower, they are not flourishing. Because to flourish means to grow straight and bloom. Well, these guys are not doing that, but this guy is. So then we could say that since this guy here is blooming, growing straight, he is excelling at being flower. Therefore, he is flourishing. Therefore, he is happy. So in other words, happiness to the Greek does not mean that you have a smile on your face. In fact, you could very well be smiling and not be happy at all. Because if you think about it, obviously the analogy now to the flowers won't really be logical, but in order to bloom and grow straight, that's going to take some effort, work, and self-discipline. So perhaps one of the reasons why these guys here, A and C, perhaps the reason they are not blooming is because they're more busy, you know, watching television or playing video games or being distracted now from being flower. But if you think about it, a lot of the things that are fun are in fact the kind of things that bring us much pleasure. And if we think of happiness as pleasure, then this guy here could be very happy as long as he's laughing and is amused while he ignores his function, which is to grow and bloom. And that's going to be the trouble about understanding fully Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, because happiness in the ancient sense, and happiness, I would argue, even in the 18th century. So when Jefferson is writing in the Declaration of Independence that all men are equal and endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, he does not mean this kind of he happy. He doesn't mean this kind of, I'm on my couch playing video games instead of going to school, and I'm happy, ha ha ha, because it's pleasurable and amusing to play video games instead of working at school. That's not at all the happiness that they had in mind. That's not what Aristotle meant. That's not what Jefferson meant. And so part of the problem is to understand what the Greeks mean by happiness. Hence the word flourishing is a much better example. Because you could say that in English, right, that someone who is really lazy and just wants to play video games all day, you might say that they're happy in English, but you wouldn't say they're flourishing. And that's basically one of the important concepts to have in understanding Aristotle.